Lots of people struggle to be assertive because they misunderstand this one crucial thing. Hi, this is Bruce Lambert from How Communication Works. This is a channel where I teach you about communication skills so you can improve your relationships, succeed at work, and be more confident. I've been a scientist and college professor for more than 30 years. Since 2017, I've been creating educational videos about communication skills on YouTube and on TikTok. For 15 years prior to that, I traveled around the country training healthcare professionals how to communicate with patients and families. In this video, I'm going to talk about assertiveness, politeness, and power and how they relate to one another. These are issues I've personally wrestled with. When I was younger, I often swung between two extremes. Sometimes I was way too blunt and direct. I thought I was being assertive, but mostly I just came across as rude. Other times, I tried to be extremely polite, but I felt weak or wishy-washy, like a pushover. I published my first article about power and politeness more than 30 years ago in the context of healthcare, and I've studied the topic ever since. If you're someone who struggles to find the right balance between assertiveness and politeness, or if you're too polite and you want to be more assertive, this video will help you understand exactly what you've been getting wrong. Without this insight, you'll stay stuck in a frustrating cycle, either too blunt and rude or overly apologetic and powerless. Politeness is a fundamental part of human interaction, but it's not just about being deferential, like deferring to other people. Politeness is fundamentally about recognizing the inherent dignity and autonomy of other people and ourselves. But excessive politeness, especially too much indirectness, can unintentionally weaken your message and diminish your perceived authority or assertiveness or power. One of the most common forms of politeness involves indirectness, that is, saying one thing by saying something else and relying on the other person to make an inference about what you really meant. Why is indirectness a problem? Many people mistakenly think politeness is indirectness, or indirectness is the only form of politeness, as we can only be polite by kind of beating around the bush and hinting at what we mean. For example, when someone invites you to a dinner or coffee or a date and you don't really want to go, you want to refuse the invitation, you might say, I'll check my schedule, or maybe next time. And that might feel polite, but it often just creates ambiguity or confusion or anxiety. Indirectness often involves a subtle denial of the conditions required to accept an invitation. For example, if you can accept an invitation, you have to be able to do the thing, you have to want to do the thing, and it has to be appropriate for you to do the thing. So you can deny any of those conditions, and that's a way to indirectly refuse a request. So for example, someone wants to invite you out to dinner or to coffee, and you say, I'm not able to join, I can't. So that's denying your ability to do it. Or you say, I don't really feel like it. So that's denying your desire to do the thing. Or you can say, it's probably not the best event for me. And that's denying the appropriateness of the invitation. These are all indirect refusals because none of them comes right out and says, I decline your invitation. They decline your invitation, but they do it by saying something else. In this case, by denying one of the key conditions for accepting any invitation. So these refusals, when you do them indirectly, signal deference or lower power than the speaker. They implicitly place the inviter's dignity and power over your own. In order to understand this, we have to understand how politeness varies according to three key factors. These three factors are power, social distance, and the intrinsic threateningness of the act that we're doing. So all other things being equal, the more powerful the speaker is with respect to the hearer, the less polite the speaker has to be. And greater the intrinsic threateningness of the action, the more polite will be. So some actions are simply more face-threatening than others. So for example, making a request to borrow $1,000 is much more face-threatening than making a request to borrow a quarter or $1. Criticizing someone's handwriting is much less face-threatening than criticizing someone's spouse. So some acts are just more face-threatening than others, and the more face-threatening the act is, the more polite you need to be. So there you have it, power, social distance, and the intrinsic threateningness of the act. Those are the things that modulate how much politeness we need to use. What we can see in these rules is that since powerful people tend to use less politeness, or at least have the ability to use less politeness, then greater directness communicates more confidence, more autonomy, more assertiveness than if you're being indirect. So greater directness communicates more confidence and autonomy, signaling that your dignity matters at least as much or more than the other person's dignity in the situation. When you use indirectness, you're signaling greater deference, like verbally bowing to the other person. You're signaling humility. You're signaling a kind of submission, at least verbally. And these things are subtle. It's not like you're literally submitting to the other person. These are the subtle differences that our word choices imply. Let me clarify what I mean by directness. Sociolinguists Stephen Levinson and Penelope Brown, in their book about politeness, say that the least polite strategy for doing anything is what they call bald on the record. So in this case, that's doing the face-threatening act, like refusing an invitation, with absolutely no hedging, no apologizing, no beating around the bush, saying it directly, no hinting. So in this case, it might be something like someone invites you to coffee or for dinner or for a date, and you say, "I decline your invitation," or you just say, "No." These are very direct refusals, as direct as they can be, but they often come across as harsh and even inappropriate for some social situations. If you were to ever say to someone in modern life, "I decline your invitation," they would just think you're strange. Even just saying no, "Would you like to go out to dinner? Would you like to get some coffee?" You just say no. That's going to come across as extremely direct and possibly rude. There's another politeness strategy that Brown and Levinson talk about, and they call it on the record with redress. On the record with redress means saying it directly, but saying it with a little sugar, with a little cherry on top. Something kind, some additional language that acknowledges the dignity of the other person while still making, in this case, the invitation refusal directly. So on the record with redress, invitation refusal would normally state the refusal directly, but soften it with some politeness, especially what's called positive politeness, which expresses appreciation to the person doing the invitation and closeness or affiliation with the person who's doing the invitation. Examples of this might be something like, "Thanks, I'll pass," or "I appreciate it, but I'm going to sit this one out." Those are both direct refusals of the invitation, but they're much more polite than saying, "I decline," or just "no." So these phrases explicitly do the refusal, but they're casual and informal language, signals friendship, closeness, mutual respect. So it's directness, but it's polite. So the choice is not between being rude or being weak and deferential. The choice is between being polite but direct, or polite but indirect. And it's the indirectness, it's the apologizing, the hedging, the hinting, the beating around the bush that signals deference and low power. So why does refusing something like an invitation directly feel uncomfortable some of the time, especially if you're not accustomed to asserting your power? It feels uncomfortable because directness explicitly asserts your power, your autonomy, your dignity, and it clearly signals social power. This can feel uncomfortable because it directly challenges the cultural norm around deference and humility. This kind of discomfort is natural. It signifies you're consciously asserting your power and your authority, and you'll get more comfortable with this over time if you're not already a particularly assertive person. So let me give you some examples of indirect versus direct ways to refuse an invitation. And these indirect ways are polite, and the direct ways are polite as well. They're just more assertive. So an indirect way might be something like, "I'm not sure, maybe another time." A direct alternative would be, "Thanks, but I'll sit this one out." An indirect way might be, "Something just came up, sorry." A more direct way might be, "I appreciate the invitation, but I'll pass this time." An indirect way might be something like, I might be busy, I'll let you know." And a direct way would be, "Thank you, but I'm going to skip this one." Notice that all of the direct ways are still polite because they still offer this cherry on top, a little bit of sugar, often in the form of friendliness and appreciation, but they directly refuse the request. There's no hedging, there's no hinting, there's no beating around the bush, there's no indirectness. And as a result, you come across as more powerful. And probably even just saying these things this way will make you feel more powerful. And if I'm correct in my analysis, the direct ones will sound more powerful and assertive to you. So what's the ideal strategy for being powerful and polite? It's directness with redress, I think, which means directness with a little sugar on top. So combine directness with positive politeness. Clearly refuse, but demonstrate genuine appreciation. "Thanks so much for inviting me. It sounds lovely, but I'm going to sit this one out. Let's catch up soon, though." Or another one. "I really appreciate you thinking of me. That means a lot, but I'll pass this time." Notice that the refusals are direct. They come across as assertive and powerful, but not rude, because you're using positive politeness. That is this form of redress. You're saying the refusal directly, which we know threatens to cause the other person to lose face, we're acknowledging their dignity as a human being by thanking them and saying something nice about them. So we get this balance. We get directness, which asserts power and autonomy, and we get positive politeness, which shows respect for the dignity of the other person. So this approach balances recognition of the inviter's dignity with explicit assertion of your own boundaries and your autonomy. And that's why I prefer this strategy. So what's the key takeaway? Politeness isn't just about managing power. It's fundamentally about respecting everyone's essential dignity, but being excessively polite or indirect unintentionally places your dignity below the other person's. And that's not where we want to be most of the time. True assertiveness skillfully balances respectful recognition of the other person's dignity with an explicit assertion of your own boundaries, rights, and dignity. So directness is power. Politeness is respect. You don't need to sacrifice one in order to do the other. Clear, polite directness is your most powerful tool for assertive communication. Remember, any initial discomfort you have with directness signals that you're really truly asserting your dignity and power, and that might be new to you. If you like this kind of video, please like and subscribe. If you like this kind of video in general, there's lots of other videos on the channel, and I'll link to some of them here. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time.